I think the other thing on smart grid, and we all talk about it, but the smart grid today, at least the theory, depends very heavily on central generation. And the problem with smart grid is the ability to communicate between the generation source and the load point. And if you go to distributed generation, which fuel cells are very capable of doing, probably more capable than any other technology that we have available today, it can be dispatched, but it can also be, it can communicate locally as opposed to trying to communicate across large distances and being able to balance the need between demand and generation so that the smart grid actually becomes more robust as a result of having the distributed generation resource available. And natural gas is instrumental in making that happen because that's how the fuel gets to the fuel cells in order to be able to make them work. So the hydrogen content of that natural gas is fundamental to fuel cell operation. And you sort of tie it all together, you make a very robust utility environment.
The key to having a truly smart grid is that the two-way communication piece, the data management, the interdependency is paramount between the two grids, between the electric grid and the natural gas grid. And when you begin to move along, as you're talking about the central generation, I think what you'll see is a paradigm shift over time where you'll see more and more of that energy usage, the wise energy usage, if you will, of that energy being used directly at the point of need or point of use. So you're going to see a shift towards more use of microgrids, distributed generation with combined heat and power. Much of what we're talking about here is really what is the smartest choice to jump on that smart energy grid thought, and what is the best way, the most cost-effective energy choice that the consumer should be making, and the lowest carbon piece. You need to keep in mind some of this abundance piece, the security, if you will, of the availability of that natural gas throughout North America. So all of that is woven into what we perceive to be our smart energy future.
So what I'm taking away from this is that we shouldn't limit our thinking to a smart electric grid, and that we should really be thinking about a smart energy future that goes beyond just the electric side and encompasses natural gas. Let's move on to the subject of investment. You can design clean stationary power to create gas load in areas where power and gas service are deficient, boosting infrastructure. However, there are regulatory barriers to gas industry putting investments in rate base, as Dave pointed out. I'd like the panel to address, do you see trends where progressive regulation will allow gas companies broader investment options? And how does that work to advance fuel cells? You want to take a shot at that?
Well, maybe I can start, Frank. I mean, we have, from about 2004, the idea I presented was a concept at that point, and we started at that point reaching out to our government in Ontario, our local Ontario Energy Board regulators, to educate them on what some of the benefits would be. I can share with you today, we're still struggling. The plant's now been running for 2 years. People understand the clean, the green, the efficient, but there are inherent challenges in people changing the idea of the types of equipment different utilities should invest in. And I'd say one of the more innovative examples from a regulatory perspective is probably in California, where there was some limited, albeit, efforts, but they are rate-basing some fuel cell installations by the electric utilities for cogeneration, just to get the technology deployed into different applications. And so I think when you start to see where the utilities can use this to optimize their system, whether it's pipelines, whether it's wires, they should be able to make that investment if they can demonstrate that their systems become more efficient or they're meeting some other societal benefit through that. If they can't, then whatever benefits that they are capturing may not be able to be captured by private sector investment. The benefits exist, but they just get socialized. And the moment something happens like that, it becomes more challenging to get the economics for fuel cells or other alternative systems to work. So if something just gets socialized as a benefit, no monetary value, then it gets tougher. The costs got to get lower. It just backs up when the investment can occur.
Well, what I see in this particular space is, particularly as I work with the North American Energy Standards Board, we're an organization that is really tasked to develop standards within the industry to help foster greater commercial activity, to streamline commercial activity. We work directly with the utility regulatory commissions. We work directly with FERC on development of those standards. In many instances, the standards that we develop get passed directly to FERC for them to decide whether or not there's enough of an industry consensus around those standards to implement across the industry. And so as we think about public policy and as we think about our interaction as an industry, I think it's very important that more of those of you that know and understand fuel cells and the business of fuel cells, the technology of fuel cells, get involved in those forums, get involved and provide some insight as it relates to public policy, as it relates to the standards that are needed, interoperability standards that might be needed associated with it. As putting on my hat as AGL Resources, as we think about just alternative energy broadly, and we think about alternative fuels, we think about alternative fuel vehicles, we think about hybrid technologies associated with power generation, the role that natural gas should play in that. We think about renewables and the interplay between natural gas and renewable technologies. All these are issues that we are sorting through and thinking about as we go. And we really, from an investment standpoint, we want to assure that we have made enough investments across an entire front, if you will, of alternative energy strategies that will position us well to continue to grow our company. And as such, we're taking a look at various technologies and how those technologies can interplay. The Enbridge technology that has been described to you today, I think, is a perfect example of hybridizing a number of technologies to create greater efficiency, greater resiliency, and greater responsiveness on the various grids. And so those are the kinds of opportunities we look for in terms of investment. And then how do we think about positioning those investments for the growth of our company? And so some of these investments, as we think about them, as an example, we talk about smart grid. There's projected to be well over $2 trillion of investment made in smart grid. But in order for the smart grid to be of use, there are a number of enabling technologies that have to be really put to use associated with it. And fuel cells should be, from a distributed generation standpoint, should be one of those technologies that's enabled, along with renewables and others. And so when you think about the sheer volume of the investment that's going to need to be made in order to create this smart energy future, it's pretty staggering. And there's no doubt in my mind that fuel cells should have a critical role or a role in what that future is going to look like. But in order for that to occur, we have to have those of you that know and understand the technology and the business to get involved in these various forums.
Continuing on this, the U.S. government has been heavily involved with the stimulus program, loan guarantee programs, the smart grid. Much of the smart grid investment has come with U.S. government involvement. There's discussions of having a clean energy bank. To what extent does the U.S. government need to continue to be at the beginning of the investment cycle in order to see these technologies thrive?
I'll jump in on that. I think that the federal government needs to open a lot of doors, and there are a lot of different ways that can happen, both from a policy standpoint, but also from a procurement standpoint, particularly on the fuel cell side of things. And I think if we start, we have to, and this goes to some of the earlier comments, but we have to start thinking about energy as a whole, as opposed to a couple of different pieces. We've got an electric piece here, we've got a coal piece there, we've got a gas piece here. We need to start thinking about a comprehensive energy policy. when you start thinking about it comprehensively, you start looking at what are the trades that you can make. Maybe we don't want to invest $7 trillion in a smart grid if we can do it for $3 trillion and we can get a very robust distributed generation network in play and start building the security of the energy infrastructure and balancing out our needs for different types of fuels and fuel resources in order to provide energy for the country. So I think as we start thinking about the investments, there needs to be a national sort of energy policy, and then we sort of talk also about the states, because the states regulate both the electric and gas utilities very heavily, and sometimes those regulations do not promote the most efficient use of resources and the best production of energy for either the business or the individual consumer.
Frank, I can say that one of the things that the Natural Gas Council has done, the Natural Gas Council is a group made up of the AGA, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, IPAA, which is the Independent Producers, and NGSA, the Natural Gas Supply Association. They get together. They've written to Senator Bingaman asking for a clean energy standard as opposed to just renewable energy. So the focus is on a broader range of energy involvement, which would very much include natural gas and anything if you're looking at ultimately reducing emissions as one of the goals of our country.
Interesting. You mentioned clean energy standards. Let's talk about that for a moment, because we think of renewable energy. We hear renewable, and that's fuel-based. Fuel cells are a technology that converts renewable fuel or natural gas to electricity, to stationary power generation. The definition of renewable seems to be limiting in many ways and doesn't really allow for the efficiency attributes, the low carbon attributes, the broader use of natural gas as a fuel. Do we need a more progressive, clean standard as opposed to just a pure renewable standard?
I would vote absolutely on that.
Okay.
Otherwise, you don't advance things. At the same time that fuel cell might be looking for inroads into it, natural gas is looking to expand its piece of the market. You've got coal. There's a very strong coal lobby in this country that's out trying to make sure that they don't go away. And there's a tremendous amount of coal generation in the country that's vying for that same market. I mean, that's ultimately what a lot of it's all about. And if you look at ways to generate electricity and run the country and at the same time do it more cleanly, you have to go to a clean energy standard.